Hey everybody, it's Ollie here. Yeah, Ollie from the Hyperfocus channel, back at it again. So, there's this one thing that's kind of been following me around since my PhD days. Even though, honestly, I never actually finished the doctorate. Anyway, back then, my profs used to repeat this one line all the time. A real scientist assumes that anything could be possible until it's proven impossible. It sounds, I don't know, maybe a little provocative, but basically it's about keeping your mind open. Don't just dismiss a hypothesis with, ugh, that's nonsense, without doing a real analysis first. 'Cause, what if we're wrong? Take stuff like telepathy, ghosts, life after death, things that pretty much make a lot of scientists roll their eyes. Me, I'm never like, dude, you're talking nonsense. Even now, after years of digging into hard science, I still think it's better to be cautious when saying what's possible and what's not. Sure, if there's no empirical proof, you can't exactly move something into, accepted theory. But not having proof that something exists doesn't automatically mean it doesn't exist. It just tells us we don't know yet. Period. Does that mean supernatural stuff is real? Nah, not necessarily. But it also doesn't mean it's not. We got no solid proof either way. As someone wiser than me once said, the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence. If the greatest scientists in history had been all, that's impossible because nobody's done it yet, we'd probably still be chillin' in caves drawing on the walls. But here we are. We've got telescopes peering into the depths of space, quantum computers doing crazy stuff, and, well, this YouTube episode. Today I kind of want to flip the question. We're not exactly going to look for evidence that ghosts or telepathy exist. Instead, let's ask if there's any way we can scientifically prove they don't exist. And hey, heads up, I'm not saying they do exist. I'm just saying I can't flat out deny it. I remember back when I was doing my PhD in super abstract quantum physics, spent hours and hours in these weird math spaces where the only limit was basically algebra. Then I'd come back out to our normal 3D+Time reality and be like, what does any of this really mean for actual physics? For actual reality? And I gotta admit, calculations in infinite dimensional spaces totally blow everyday intuition out of the water. Sure, it's mathematically correct, but the interpretation? Yeah. That's where it got messy. I'd just say, well, the equations check out, but what are they showing us about the real world? Not everyone knows this, but physicists have been using way more than 3+1 dimensions in models for ages, and it actually works. You can't just dismiss it mathematically. And if someone says, that's got nothing to do with ghosts or telepathy, then, go on. Prove that reality is only 3D+Time. In science, we don't really say, nah, that's bogus. We say, okay, so show me the proof it can't happen. Now, I'm not going to do a big lecture on black holes or the Casimir effect, though, oh my gosh, I would love to. I just want to highlight that I know that I don't know, and that kind of humble awareness is actually super valuable. We're going to get a bit sci-fi, but still keep things academically honest. That's my favorite kind of combo. First hypothesis. Maybe our senses limit us more than they help. The human eye is actually kind of meh compared to a high-end camera. So does that mean something definitely doesn't exist just because we can't see it with the naked eye? Not necessarily. Purely scientifically, the lack of evidence shouldn't be confused with evidence of a lack. And it's not just our senses. It's also the way we describe space. We're always counting, how many light years away some star is in our usual Cartesian space-time. But maybe we should be looking for life, or consciousness, or alien civilizations in a totally different somewhere, not pinned down by our standard 3D+Time coordinates. What if the truth isn't billions of light years away, but right here, just not in the slice of time-space we're used to? I love the Dirac delta function. It's so unassuming. Zero everywhere except at one point, and then, bam, infinity. In 3D+Time, it has a certain meaning, but in n dimensions, it might behave in a whole different way. Maybe every zero in our reality is actually an infinity in some other scale. I'm not saying that's how it is. I'm just saying I can't rule it out. So yeah, I believe, and that doesn't mean I know, that we're part of a way bigger structure than just 3D plus time. Philip K. Dick once asked, "What if our world is someone else's heaven?" And I'd add, "What if it's someone else's purgatory?" Prove that's impossible. You can't? Exactly. No proof is not like a mic drop argument. I've met scientists who, pardon my French, would just reject anything that isn't dogma. Nope, 'cause nope. End of story. And I've also met scientists who twist data so they can prove the existence of the supernatural. Me, I'm in the middle. I just say, I don't know. Maybe telepathy's real, maybe it isn't. We don't have a method to fully disprove it or prove it, so I'm not about to slam that door shut. And do we invent the laws of nature? Or do they exist and we're just discovering them? If a meteor slammed into Earth tomorrow and wiped us all out, in a million years some new civilization would rediscover all this stuff anyway, right? These laws are out there, doing their thing, whether we interpret them or not. That's pretty much my main point today. The world could be way bigger than this little box we call 3D plus time. We can, and I'd argue should, ask questions about ghosts, telepathy, extra dimensions, without losing our scientific sanity. And also saying, I don't know, isn't a fail. It's actually where a lot of cool explorations begin. So yeah, today's episode, we're going to check out 5 fascinating ideas. Telepathy. Could our brains be doing more than we think? Ghosts. Is there some kind of existence beyond, well, this one? Higher dimensions. Are we really stuck in 3D plus time, or is there more? Meditation, especially having no head. Does it reveal something about the limits of ourself? Gnosticism. This ancient philosophy might still have serious insights for us. We'll walk through each topic, starting from the basics, and then see how far science or deep philosophy can take us, depending on what the evidence, or the lack of it, suggests. Alrighty, that's my little intro. Welcome to my shiny new channel, Hyperfocus. I really hope we can create a space here for the most, mind-bending questions, and who knows, maybe someday we'll find some mind-bending answers too. Let's jump in. Alright, so imagine this scenario. You're sitting around a table with a friend, totally lost in thought. You've got this intense idea running around in your head, and then, bam, out of nowhere, your friend blurts out exactly what you were thinking. I mean, is that just a random coincidence? Or maybe you two are so in sync you've developed similar mental associations. But hey, the big question is, could that be telepathy? We typically connect telepathy with parapsychology, sci-fi flicks, or some fringe notion of mind powers that never got a real thumbs up in any lab. But let's actually take it apart on multiple levels, from these everyday wow moments all the way up to serious experimental attempts, and even the truly advanced domains of quantum physics and quantum gravity. Now, most physicists are, super skeptical, but these borderline sci-fi theories, like the one proposed by Penrose and Hameroff, do come up as a potential gateway for mind-to-mind communication that sidesteps the usual laws we know. I'm going to start with what I'd call the pop culture take on telepathy. If you say telepathy, the average person probably imagines 2 people finishing each other's sentences, or literally reading each other's minds with 0 external cues. In real life, like at the dinner table, or at work, or just with friends or partners, we sometimes experience moments that feel uncannily like we're in each other's heads. And the simplest way to explain that is, we share the same topics, or we've known each other for a long time, so we zero in on the same associations, often at the same time. Psychologically speaking, there's a whole toolkit of explanations. Subtle signals, vocal tones, micro-expressions, the entire social context. Tiny details like that can totally give us the impression of mind reading, when it's really advanced pattern recognition, plus a lot of shared history. That said, scientists have been trying for years to see if they can confirm telepathy in any empirical way. We've got the famous Ganzfeld experiments, where one person tries to send images or emotional content, while the other person is in partial sensory deprivation, trying to receive that info. There have been moments in the research where some folks said, "Oh hey, we beat chance levels." But once you expand the scale or replicate it, those results often fall apart. Then there's the classic Zener cards with symbols, like you see in old parapsychology movies. Again, under tight procedures, nobody's demonstrated anything clearly above random chance. So from a conventional scientific standpoint, the verdict is pretty straightforward. Even after decades of this kind of testing, no one's produced a solid, repeatable demonstration of telepathy. Sure, absence of evidence isn't strictly the same as evidence of absence. But if there's some extremely subtle, condition-specific phenomenon, it's obviously been elusive to detect. Either way, mainstream research so far hasn't turned up anything that'd flip the scientific community on its head. I mean, we do know that science can't fully rule telepathy out, but it sure hasn't found proof for it either. And that leads us to the more advanced physics angle. Those theories that go beyond, maybe our brainwaves overlap somehow, and dive right into quantum mechanics, or even quantum gravity. In this realm, you'll see folks referencing Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's so-called OR model, orchestrated objective reduction. This is not your everyday pop science fluff. Most quantum physicists treat it with, let's say, significant skepticism. But for the sake of completeness, if we're trying to gauge whether telepathy has any anchor in hard science, we might as well see what these guys are saying. Roger Penrose, brilliant mathematician and theoretical physicist, known for collaborating with Stephen Hawking on black hole singularities, has been arguing that classical quantum mechanics, especially the standard Copenhagen interpretation, just isn't enough to fully explain consciousness. Normally, in quantum theory, you've got a wave function describing a particle's state, and when you measure it, the wave function collapses. But Penrose thinks the reason for that collapse might be deeper, possibly a gravitational phenomenon. He sometimes calls it a gravitational mechanism of wave function reduction, or objective reduction, OR. The idea is that certain superpositions, particularly those with different mass distributions and thus different space-time curvatures, can't remain stable indefinitely. At some threshold related to gravitational self-energy, the state spontaneously chooses, so to speak. Meanwhile, Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who studies the brain, jumped on board by pointing to microtubules, these protein structures in neurons that might, in principle, sustain a form of quantum coherence. Together, they proposed that there could be orchestrated quantum-level events in these microtubules that become the actual bedrock of consciousness. According to OR, your brain isn't just a classical neuron-based computer, it's tapping into quantum mechanics, complete with gravity-driven collapse, to produce subjective awareness. Advocates say that super-rapid collapses within microtubules could unify information in ways that classical systems just can't manage. If somebody really wanted to jam telepathy in there, they might guess that if consciousness is indeed anchored at this quantum gravitational level, maybe, under certain exotic conditions we haven't pinned down, minds could exchange information in a manner beyond our usual physics. But let's be clear, this is majorly controversial. Most quantum physicists highlight the decoherence problem, i.e., quantum states in hot, wet, busy environments, like living cells at -37 degrees, will unravel almost instantly. Biological systems are full of thermal noise, collisions, chemical reactions, etc. So if microtubules manage any hint of quantum coherence, it should be destroyed practically the moment it appears. Hameroff and Penrose counter that microtubules have hydrophobic regions where water molecules might form an ordered matrix, potentially fostering coherence a bit longer. But we're talking speculation here. The direct experimental evidence for sustained quantum states in neurons is minimal at best. And even if some ephemeral quantum effect did occur, it's tough to see how it would leap beyond your skull and, beam itself into another brain with no detectable physical carrier. In his books, like Shadows of the Mind, Penrose admits the whole thing is still largely mysterious. He references non-commutative geometry, amplitude calculations, and suggests that if gravity is truly part of the wave function collapse, maybe standard micro versus macro distinctions don't quite work in the context of consciousness. In that sense, phenomena we usually think of as purely subatomic might exist in subtle forms on bigger biological scales. Following that logic, some researchers are trying to merge quantum field theory, gauge theories, or modified collapse models with neurobiology, hypothesizing that the brain can get entangled with deeper levels of reality. So where's telepathy in all this? Well, that's the million-dollar question. Suppose, purely hypothetically, two minds share some sort of corrected, entangled state. In labs, we see entanglement in photons or electrons, not entire neuronal networks. But if you jump into science fiction territory, or read the more fringe-friendly theoretical papers, you'll see speculation about a superposition of conscious states, intricately bound up with the geometry of space-time, thereby bypassing normal electromagnetic channels. If that were the case, maybe in special situations, deep meditation, trance states, or untested experimental protocols, you might detect some telepathic correlation that exceeds random chance. Problem is, no one's done so in any robust, reproducible way. Then there's also the speed of light limit. Relativity says information can't travel faster than light, and even though quantum entanglement is spooky action at a distance, it doesn't let you transmit useful data without a classical channel. Some interpretational frameworks, like relational quantum mechanics or Bohm de Broglie, try to talk around that, but it still doesn't hand us a neat mechanism for, I'm thinking of you and you're picking it up across the city. Even if we buy into quantum gravity consciousness effects in the brain, and that's already a big if, you'd still need some further step to explain how that translates into large-scale thought transfer between two separate people. Mainstream quantum physics basically says that, sure, maybe there's something weird and quantum-y in neurons, but there's nothing suggesting you can set up a telepathic link across physical space. No one's proposed a recognized mechanism that'd yield an actual, functional thought network in that sense. So, from one angle, we keep open the possibility that humanity might discover something that shatters our current understanding. After all, quantum gravity is still unsolved. We've got M-theory, loop quantum gravity, all kinds of attempts to merge general relativity and quantum mechanics. It's not insane to think that, in this big realm of mysteries, we might stumble on phenomena that circumvent the typical 3D+Time constraints, making telepathy seem less far-fetched. But from the other angle, we have this pretty ironclad scientific principle. If a phenomenon is real and is fairly robust, we should be able to demonstrate it under controlled conditions, repeatedly. And after decades of parapsychological research, there just isn't anything that's persuaded the broader physics community we've got an actual mind-to-mind transmission phenomenon. Maybe the effect, if it exists, is so tiny or so condition-dependent that we can't pin it down with current methods. Or maybe it just isn't there. So the short version is that the core of conventional science leans heavily towards saying telepathy doesn't exist, because we can't find any strong evidence for it, and attempts to rope in exotic quantum or gravitational theories are purely speculative. They don't yield a direct blueprint for telepathic data transfer. Then you've got the folks who see telepathy as a possible frontier, pointing out how bold ideas have sometimes ignited big revolutions in science. Maybe the same will happen here. Someone designs a brand new type of experiment that finally cracks the puzzle. Maybe they test these quantum gravity microtubule theories under conditions nobody's tried yet, and suddenly find something that challenges all the skeptics. But as of now, if somebody asks, does quantum physics really imply telepathy is real? The honest scientific answer is, no, it doesn't. We've got 0 widely accepted experiments that confirm mind-to-mind data exchange without normal communication. We do have intriguing theoretical frameworks that could be twisted to allow the idea of telepathy, but no actual proof. So the mainstream perspective is that telepathy still sits in parapsychology, not established physics. If you believe in telepathy, it's more about personal belief, anecdote, or maybe some intangible intuition. Definitely not about well-verified empirical data. Still, The very fact that theories like OR exist, or that we even debate wave function collapse in connection to consciousness, shows how science can push into tricky, even borderline speculative territory. And that's good. Without it, we'd never get any big paradigm shifts in physics or anywhere else. If we ever do see telepathy convincingly demonstrated, it'd probably force a colossal re-examination of both quantum physics and our model of the mind. Will that happen? Could be yes, could be no. For now, telepathy remains highly doubtful, but not formally disproven. So let's set it aside and move on to other mysteries. Because honestly, the world's got plenty of other equally mesmerizing questions to occupy us. But hey, there's always a chance someone someday dreams up a test that defies all rational explanation under standard physics, and we'd see a massive scientific shakeup. That's how science rolls, right? We ask these big, sometimes far-out questions to probe the boundaries of what we think we know. We design experiments, and if the data says no, we move on. But we never kill a hypothesis just because it sounds goofy. If it fails the test, so be it. If not, game on. So that's the big picture of telepathy within the realm of advanced physics. There's really nothing indicating it's real. But since we lack a complete theory of everything, there's a tiny window left open for folks who love exotic possibilities. And if any quantum physicists or other scientists are listening, I think we can all agree the safest stance is no confirmation, no refutation, no credible mechanism. So yeah, we'll keep an eye out in case something revolutionary pops up. Alright, that wraps up telepathy. Whatever it is or isn't, right now it's stuck in this twilight zone between some mind-blowing quantum gravity possibilities and the cold, repeated negative results in experiments. Let's move to the next phenomenon, because we've got a few more to chew on. Still, you never know. One day, if someone pulls off a test that truly breaks standard physics, well, we'll all be talking about it. Alright, so let's talk about ghosts and life after death in a way that sounds like a real spoken story. No bullet points, no stiff formulas. We'll start easy and then ramp things up toward quantum physics, neurobiology, and beyond, because we don't want to stop at spooky horror movie cliches. Ready? Let's roll. Imagine it's late evening, and you're sitting in this old wooden house. The floorboards creak, the lamp flickers a little, and you've got that weird feeling something might be lurking behind you. You can't really see anything, but the vibe is heavy, like the whole house is hiding some dark secret. And here's the big question. Is it just your imagination, or are you actually dealing with a ghost? We've all heard the stories, right? Somebody says they saw an apparition wandering down the hallway. Somebody else heard weird knocking noises for no apparent reason. And somebody else swears that 100 years ago, right there in that very spot, someone was buried without ever finding peace. Sound familiar? Sure it does. Pop culture is loaded with ghosts, from campfire tales to horror flicks with special effects that make spirits literally dance on the ceiling. Now most of us kinda grin and say, must be the floor creaking, or a draft, or maybe I'm just on edge. But does that really cover every haunting story out there? Before we say, yeah, that's nonsense, let's do what I always do in these segments and look at the whole thing from different angles. First from the psych side, then from a parapsychology standpoint, and finally from some seriously advanced science. It might not be so simple to knock it down with a quick, nope, not real. So I'll start with psychology, because that's probably the easiest shield against ghosts. The human brain's a champ at interpreting stimuli and, well, it's also really good at filling in details that aren't actually there. We've got what we call pareidolia, where you see faces in clouds, silhouettes in shadows, or hear whispers in the static of an old radio. Then there's infrasound, these low-frequency sounds that can rattle you a bit, give you that uneasy feeling in your gut. Or think about hypnagogic hallucinations that pop up on the edge of sleep and wakefulness, when you feel like something's hovering over you, but it's really just your brain playing tricks. A lot of hauntings might be explained by the fact our mind loves to fool us, especially when we're tired or freaked out. Then we've got parapsychology, which tries to scientifically study these things. but unfortunately there aren't any solid repeatable tests. Maybe you've heard of EVP, electronic voice phenomena, where somebody records static and hears a voice from the beyond going, "Stay with me." Critics say, "Oh please, that's just you projecting words onto random noise." And has anybody ever confirmed it objectively? Nah, not really, because if you can blame it on acoustic quirks, mainstream science just shrugs and goes, "Nothing here." So from a psych standpoint, we've got plenty of ways to explain so-called ghosts in a rational way. But what about that deeper level? The one that really touches on academic bedrock, quantum physics, neurobiology, and information theory. Let's suppose someone believes a ghost is really just some form of energy or information that doesn't die with the body. Is there any trace of that in physics? We can start with a straightforward argument about thermodynamics. Life is an organized system, and death is the breakdown of that system. The organism stops functioning, entropy goes up, the orderly neuronal activity fizzles out. From a neurobiology angle, consciousness is basically a pattern of brain activity driven by the chemistry and electricity of neurons. Once the body decays, that machine just falls apart. And that's it. No physical carrier, no you. Seems simple, right? But wait, there's also quantum information. In quantum mechanics, there's that principle that information shouldn't be destroyed, the whole black hole debate with Hawking. Does that open the door to saying, hey, if info can't vanish, your consciousness might be eternal? Problem is, that's probably a stretch. It's talking about info in the sense of particle states, not your personal chain of thoughts floating around somewhere. Without a physical system that reproduces those states, even if quantum info spreads out, we don't end up with any me able to do stuff in the world. Entropy pretty much scrambles everything. So then you might wonder about quantum gravity, or theories like ADS-CFT, the holographic universe idea. Sure, that's super intriguing, and some folks might get romantic with it. Maybe, in that holographic layer, all our souls are stored. But that's more of a literary or philosophical notion. Real scientific papers that take ADS-CFT seriously focus on black holes, quantum fields. Definitely not ghosts roaming old castles. There's no experiment out there saying, hey look, we found a consciousness coded in the hologram. And then there's neurobiology. If you recall from earlier, I did a lot of stuff with abstract quantum physics, so I know math can be surprising. But at the same time, over the past few decades, we've had a flood of brain research like fMRI, PET, EEG scans. If there was a stable entity independent of the brain but steering our behavior somehow, we'd probably notice anomalies, maybe an energy gap we can't explain. But we don't see that. Everything points to our personality and consciousness being locked into this biological computer made of neurons and synapses. Once that shuts down, what we call me, according to that paradigm, stops existing. Is there a workaround? At this point, no one's come up with a quantum neurobiology model that says, sure, after death you slip into a non-local superposition and go visit the living as a ghost. The closest we've got is panpsychism, the view that all matter in the universe has some grain of consciousness, but that's more philosophy than hardcore physics. And even if panpsychism were true, it doesn't mean your spirit leaps out of your body to go scare people in the dark. So from a hard science perspective, there's not a lot of support for ghosts. Every mechanism we've discovered suggests that after death, there's no conscious entity left to interact with our world. Still, and here I go back to my favorite principle, lack of evidence isn't evidence of lack. If someone says, ghosts don't exist because that's silly, that's not exactly a scientific statement. It's more like mockery. A scientist would say, we've got no evidence, and our current paradigm says it's extremely unlikely. But that's not the same as, we proved they don't exist. From experience, I know plenty of people get not just fear, but also hope from these unexplained things. The idea that maybe we don't just vanish is kind of comforting. I'm not surprised topics like the afterlife, ghosts, reincarnation, all that keep popping up. I'm convinced that if someone ever actually recorded a ghost in a repeatable way,
like a ghost that shows up on command, moves a table, then reads a password in another room, physicists would be all over it. It'd be huge. But so far, nothing. So, end of the day, here's how it shakes out. On the everyday pop culture level, we've got tons of stories, fear, excitement, illusions, and mental hype. On the psych side, we can talk about pareidolia, infrasound, hallucinations, or plain old autosuggestion. Plenty of phenomena that account for a bunch of hauntings. And from a heavy-duty science angle, quantum physics and neurobiology, there's no reason to think our consciousness just floats off and bangs around in the closet. There's no observed interactions, no model that supports it, and the fancy multidimensional theories like ADS, CFT, or M theory are about merging quanta and gravity, not about discovering wandering souls. So what do we say? Usually, from a scientific skepticism point of view, it's almost certainly no ghosts. But yep, that little clause that saves me from dogma is, I can't hold up a card that says, absolutely impossible. Quantum physics has plenty we don't grasp, like consciousness, so I keep a teeny tiny maybe. In the eyes of most scientists, that maybe is super tiny, but it's still there. That explains why mainstream labs and universities aren't dumping loads of funding into ghost research. As far as they're concerned, it's an incredibly small probability with zero supporting data. It's more productive to dig into dark matter or black holes, because at least we know there's a real puzzle to solve there. But hey, science history does have those moments when people shrugged at something that later turned out to be important. Maybe 100 years from now someone will say, turns out ghosts were our trans-dimensional neighbors all along. Who knows? Anyway, I'll wrap this up because I already sound like I'm trying to be both the skeptic and the open-minded weirdo at the same time. But that's how I see science. We try to explain everything rationally while not shutting the door on surprises. Back in my PhD days, they taught me that a real scientist never says, "That's impossible," without proof, so I stick to that. When it comes to ghosts, sure, there's no confirmation, and we've got loads of rational psych explanations, and not a single physics model that predicts supernatural apparitions. But we haven't proven they don't exist either. That's the fun of it, right? If you've personally experienced something you just can't explain, you might have your own reason to think there's more to it. I can't knock it down, because like I said, I've got a healthy respect for all the stuff we still can't clarify in science. Now, if you're up for it, let's dive even deeper into the realm of scientific speculation. In the next part, we'll talk higher dimensions and see if maybe in 10, 11, or an infinite number of dimensions, there could be something that'd look like a ghost from our perspective. Ready for more? Let's go. Alright, so picture this. You're living in a world of two-dimensional geometry. Your entire existence is basically a flat plane, something like a sheet of paper your thoughts just wander across. You've got zero idea there could be anything above or below, because for you, it's all about lines and curves in that flat space. Maybe some fancy shapes, but all on a 2D grid. And then, wham! In comes someone from a third dimension. From where you stand in 2 dimensions, this person's doing stuff that comes off like pure magic. Meanwhile, here we are in our own day-to-day 3-dimensional environment. But it's possible we're just as limited in our scope. Ever since the 1920s, theorists have been tossing around ideas about extra dimensions. Part of that came from the old Kaluza-Klein approach, where folks tried to unify gravity and electromagnetism by suggesting there's an extra dimension in the universe, so tightly curled up that we can't perceive it. 100 years later, those early ideas exploded into entire libraries of research, especially with the rise of string theories. In the more typical string theory frameworks, you get vibrating strings in 10 dimensions. That's 9 spatial plus time. Then came the notion of pulling them all together under something we call M theory, which ups the count to 11. We're talking major mathematical constructs with brain configurations, like D-brains in Type 2A or Type 2B setups, where our so-called ordinary world, 3D+Time, might just be pinned on a certain membrane that exists inside bigger dimensions, complete with extra directions of existence. Does all that sound exotic? Sure, That's because we're stepping into territory where the equations themselves can be so abstract. They feel more like a philosophical or purely mathematical speculation than something you'd see in typical experimental physics. But there is a deep logic here. Lots of work on things like T-duality and S-duality has shown how different string models can fit together into one coherent map. That big map actually hints at the presence of higher dimensions, often rolled up so tightly at scales around 10, 30, or 10, 35 meters that we just can't see them in everyday life. Now, as soon as people hear about all these extra dimensions, they might jump to the idea that UFOs, ghosts, telepathy, or other supernatural bits are all lurking in these hidden corners. Thing is, from the mainstream perspective in string theory, or M theory, that's pretty much an overreach. The extra dimensions we talk about in those theories mostly exist to explain particle properties and unify fundamental forces in a single elegant structure. They're not just secret hallways letting you slip into some spirit realm. Still, higher dimensions get especially interesting when you bring up something called ADS/CFT. In a super rough summary, you've got a theory defined in an anti-de Sitter space, ADS, and it turns out to be equivalent to a theory in fewer dimensions, CFT, that lives on the boundary of that space. It's sometimes simplified into the notion that maybe the universe is kind of like a hologram, an idea that, can sound straight out of a Stanisław Lem novel, with that classic boundary blurring between advanced physics and philosophical metaphor. But if you ask mainstream folks, hey, does this holographic angle provide a hiding place for supernatural phenomena? They'll say, nope. It's basically a powerful tool for describing black holes, holographic entropy, quantum gravity. Definitely not a manual for ghosts. Anyway, just look at M theory itself. We're talking 11 dimensions, an 11D spacetime featuring objects like M2 and M5 brains. These are hypersurfaces with their own fancy properties. Meanwhile, in Type 2A and Type 2B theories, you've got D-brains arranged across various topologies. For an average person, it can all seem bizarre, like we're discussing multi-dimensional angels dancing on the tip of a needle. But what's really going on is that these theoretical frameworks help us describe the realm of fundamental particles in a more unified way, and unify nature's forces. No standard academic paper ties all this to ghosts or telepathy. Does that mean there's absolutely nothing else? In scientific terms, we have no direct evidence or ways to test such claims at current energy scales. We only know these extra dimensions might help clarify things like particle mass, energy hierarchies, maybe even dark matter or dark energy. But nobody's presenting them as a ticket to magical phenomena. That's not saying it's 100% impossible. Maybe someday we'll discover some mind-blowing effect that can't be explained by our 3D+Time mindset, but is trivial in a higher dimensional scenario. For now, though, caution rules.
And that's where a Lem-like perspective creeps in. Maybe every revolutionary leap in physics has always revealed new areas that used to seem impossible, then turned out to be real. In Lem's stories, you see weird encounters with pure information, or with an entire planetary ocean, like in Solaris, or with puzzle box mysteries so strange you gotta rewire your entire worldview to handle them. Similarly, a lot of physicists realize that if these higher dimensions are real, we'd have to invent brand new measuring methods. Right now, in typical labs or colliders on Earth, there's zero sign of particles leaking away into any hidden dimensions. That's the sort of thing we might be watching for as a clue that extra dimensions actually exist. But that may not be the end of the story. Who knows? Maybe down the line we'll build some collider 1,000 times more powerful than the LHC, and we'll see collisions that produce exotic brain states or other phenomena that strongly hint at extra dimensions. If that happens, our worldview might expand the same way Lem's characters face incomprehensible phenomena and have to push the boundaries of what they believe. For the time being, though, we're stuck with theoretical fiddling, doing 11D calculations, unifying Type and Type B as just two facets of the same theory, messing with conifold transitions,
and crossing our fingers that these gorgeous equations aren't just math for math's sake. From a typical 3D+Time vantage point, sure, all this might sound like a sci-fi tale of a multidimensional universe. The difference is, behind it, we've got massive amounts of math and large-scale formalism. Plus, a lot of these models remain consistent with the observations we do have, at least in the lower energy regime. They reduce to known quantum physics and general relativity. But if somebody asks, hey, do these extra dimensions explain, say, paranormal phenomena? The mainstream crowd will say, no, they're for making sense of microphysics and gravity, not for propping up ghost stories. Granted, there's a tiny space left for speculation. Nothing is strictly forbidden, but we don't have any data suggesting that's where it's all going. So we're left with this super intriguing notion. The universe might be way bigger than what we perceive, and our senses might be drastically limited. That's probably part of why so many people feel that 3D+Time is too small. And in some sense, they're right. It is too small. But physics's concept of bigger dimensions tends to be a crazy, highly mathematical place, not exactly a gateway to angels and demons. Still, there's no reason we can't keep imagining, in a Lemish spirit, that maybe these dimensions lie so far beyond our grasp. It's like in Memoirs Found in a Bathtub, where the hero can't begin to decipher the multi-layered structure behind everything he's witnessing. That, of course, drifts more into interpretation and speculation than raw data. Anyway, summing up this walkthrough, string theories, M-theory, ADA-CFT, and so on, all suggest 3D+Time might be just one slice of the universe's real geometry. This is advanced physics with a distinct shortage of direct experimental proofs, but it's still the leading candidate for a theory of almost everything. Meanwhile, the question of whether it all conceals paranormal stuff is, from the academic angle, pretty much a fairy tale notion. Official stance: no data, no reason to propose that. But in the spirit of curiosity, and I think Lem would dig this, we can still ask. We never know which layers of reality we'll uncover once our instruments get better. For the moment, we gotta settle for the knowledge that calculations in higher dimensions dovetail nicely with what we see in our standard physics, at least in those perturbative regimes. Is this a new continent waiting to be discovered, or just a fancy theoretical construct? Maybe both. It's safe to say 3D+Time might be just the tip of some enormous iceberg. Beyond that tip, it's entirely possible there's a whole realm our senses can't detect right now, and that's basically it for the higher dimensions thread. Maybe a century or two from now somebody'll say, hey, back then they had string theory, M-theory, and ADA-CFT. They were onto something monumental, but the tools weren't there yet. Could be. Or maybe we'll scrap the whole idea as a mere math curiosity someday. One thing's for sure. There's still plenty happening in our 3D+Time, and maybe even more in those extra dimensions. Until we find a way to test it, we're left with a heady mix of elegant math, physics-based creativity, and a bit of blind faith. If Lem ever wrote about the mysticism of science, I'd bet he'd place it here, in these multi-dimensional labyrinths that might be waiting for explorers bold enough to decode them.
All right, imagine you're sitting there in silence, maybe on a cushion, maybe just on a chair, and all of a sudden, you vanish. I don't mean your body literally evaporates. I'm talking about a state where you catch yourself not being here in the mind, but nowhere, and also everywhere at the same time. That, roughly, is how some people describe a certain kind of meditation practice, sometimes called having no head, though you could also call it ego disappearance. Plenty of folks hear that and just kind of shrug. Meditation, some mystical nonsense. But if you chat with a few legit neurobiologists, they'll tell you systematic meditation practices actually do affect how the brain works. In the last few decades, there have been loads of imaging studies, fMRI, EEG, that show meditation can reduce activity in what's called the DMN, or default mode network, which is tied to our internal monologue. When the DMN quiets down, the flood of thoughts can slow, and a lot of people describe that as a really deep sense of relief. If you're skeptical, we've already got solid data on how meditation can cut stress levels, lower blood pressure,
maybe even influence some aspects of aging, like telomere length. Mainstream neurobiology takes it seriously, not as enlightenment, but as a kind of long-term training in attention and awareness that changes how the nervous system operates. In other words, no magic, just pure physiology, though it's a fascinating kind of physiology. So what about those claims like, hey, when I meditate, I experience reality beyond time and space? Some folks say that's just your standard mystical spiel, with lines like, I enter a state where there's no me or my body. It's pure presence, and we don't even use the word being, because even the sense of being dissolves. That can all sound pretty metaphysical. Can we reconcile it with science? Well, maybe let's do it. Lem style. It could be yet another situation where our usual research tools, 3D+Time frameworks and gadgets like EEG, don't fully capture those unspeakable consciousness states. Some scientists stand firmly on the ground. Everything's in the brain, purely a neural phenomenon, period. Others speculate more openly. What if, during deep meditation, there are these subtle processes that touch on the quantum nature of consciousness, like quantum correlations or some other exotic mechanism? Then there are folks who go even further, saying, look, quantum mechanics has superposition, entanglement, and we still don't know how that ties into subjective experience, so maybe a meditative state lifts the curtain on some non-local zone of mind. That's a pretty controversial stance, kinda reminiscent of Penrose and Hameroff's arguments, but even more mystically decked out. Mainstream neurobiology either doesn't go there or says, pretty metaphor, but we lack evidence that meditation triggers stable quantum states. Nevertheless, there are a few labs that have studied, and keep studying, long-term meditators. Buddhist monks, for instance, or people who basically spend most of their life practicing contemplation. It's been shown that they can dial down their pain response, modulate their brainwaves in unusual ways, like high gamma activity, or weird rhythms in the prefrontal cortex. Is that proof we can jump beyond 3D+Time? Probably not. But from a psychology angle, it's still a big deal, because it shows the mind can manage itself more deeply than we typically assume. Now, you might be asking, so where does this Douglas Harding having no head thing come in? Well, Harding encouraged this simple observation. Look at the world as if you have no head. Not in a literal decapitation sense, but in the sense of noticing that when you look at your surroundings, you can't see your own head. So maybe what we call the I can just fade into that field of vision. The brain is always trying to stick you in the center of things. But in that exercise, it might turn out there is no center. There's just the scene, and you're not in it. A bunch of people find that moment an epiphany. Oh, so my mind's generating this feeling that there's an observer in here. But when I look for it, I don't find it. In a paradoxical way, that lines up with the radical angles of Buddhism, stuff like, the ego is an illusion, form is emptiness is form, and so on. Harding's or Sam Harris's version, though, focuses on a practical experiment. Look around, see if you truly see your head, and realize that what we think of as me can sometimes be just a construct. Psychologically, it's an interesting intervention. People who train this way regularly often report less anxiety, better emotional regulation, which isn't too surprising if you're less worried about yourself, because you don't identify so strongly with that little I. And neurobiologists might say, sure, we're seeing a strong dampening of the DMN and a shift of attention to external stimuli, or this no-head sensation, creating a flow-like state. Now, does any of this step beyond 3D+Time into actual transcendence? Some folks say, absolutely, because subjectively, it feels like they're entering another space. Zero thoughts, zero body sense, just a vastness of infinite awareness. Others say, no, it's just a psychological trick that produces a feeling of emptiness. From the standpoint of hard science, there's no real proof you're going beyond biology. But it's worth mentioning that plenty of research on meditation, around mental health or even genomics, like gene expression linked to stress, reveals that it's not just feel-good fluff, but actually a testable improvement in many parameters. So yeah, meditation as such isn't a fairy tale. It's a solid practice that does something to our neural and hormonal systems. Whether you interpret it as leaving time and space behind is a matter of perspective. Kinda in the vein of Lem, you could view meditation as this alien ocean, like in Solaris, one you dive into to find an infinite depth of perception. Or you could see it as a straightforward relaxation technique that's grown into an art form. Possibly both. One approach grants you calm and better health. The other sparks big questions about the nature of consciousness. If you're the type who's messed with equations in infinite dimensional spaces, or dabbled in non-commutative geometry, then you know our everyday 3D+Time is just one slice of the possible abstract worlds out there. Meditation might be a parallel expansion of horizons, not in physical space, but in subjective experience. For some, that's enough to say, Eureka, I'm discovering that I is an illusion, that the world is more fluid and elusive than I thought. Obviously, none of this is a proof for telepathy, ghosts, or any of the stuff we were chatting about before. But who knows? If we ever truly crack the riddle of consciousness, maybe meditation will turn out to be a key tool. Many neurologists have long pointed out that to get how the mind works, we also need to explore those states where it quiets down, free from the usual mental chatter. Maybe that's when we see something hidden in normal daily life, whether it's just a healthier brain state or the faint signals of a deeper reality. From a practical standpoint, if you want to try having no head, just sit down, relax, and try to see the world as though you didn't have a face or a head. Notice that what we usually define as me inside here isn't actually visible, and in that absence, find a sense of freedom. Sounds weird, sure, but at first it's basically a perceptual trick. Over time, though, it can become a serious practice that changes how you relate to everyday life. Kinda like noticing your thoughts aren't you, but just a stream that shows up on its own. And that's basically how it is with meditation. Some folks see it as just another positive habit, like yoga or fitness. Others see it as a gateway to something transcendent. Science mainly focuses on the neurophysiological facts, the psychological benefits, and maybe the controversies around quantum interpretations, which nobody's really validated so far. You get to pick whether you prefer a romantic story of dissolving your ego into the cosmos or a more analytical stance. It's a neural reorganization that creates a sense of emptiness. Either way, if somebody asks whether I recommend meditation, I say yeah, because even if you skip the big metaphysical stuff, that calm and quiet can do wonders in our overstimulated era. And if you happen to feel your mind stepping beyond 3D+Time, well, good for you, as long as you don't lose your house keys along the way. So that's it for today on having no head meditation. Have we unlocked the secret route to another dimension? Probably not. But maybe we've jogged the imagination a bit. Sort of like how Lem in His Master's Voice questions the limits of human understanding of signals and life forms. Here, instead of neutrino code, we've got brainwaves and a sense of boundlessness that we slip into. Is it just an illusion, or something more? That's an open question. In the next topic, we'll see whether these experiences fit into a broader philosophical or spiritual context, like certain ancient Gnostic concepts. For now, I'll leave you with the thought, maybe it's worth at least once trying to see the world headless, to find out whether in that nothing you discover some sort of infinity. So, I'm not sure if this is going to make sense to you all, but after, I don't know, like 6 months of meditating regularly in this way, I've become way more eager to say goodbye to my ego and realize that my I isn't actually in my heart or my head. It's more like this infinite field of energy that isn't bound by something like our 3D+Time. And if anyone's wondering, no, I don't use psychoactive substances. I use Harris, and maybe I've overused, like, math from other spaces, haha. And if we toss in parallel world theories, then seriously, What is I, anyway? Maybe I is partly all of us. Maybe the real me is, at least partly, heck, maybe even entirely, something shared or common to everyone. I believe that in each of us, there's the same very primal part that has existed forever, even before we were born, the part that goes back beyond any memory. I also believe that part is identical in all of us, that it forms one unity, that it's interconnected, basically one big whole. That's how I understand God. Let some skeptic come and deny it. And that's how we land on Gnosticism, because it's the closest to what I believe. Even though science doesn't confirm any of it, I'm pretty convinced of certain things. You know, some stuff you know with your head, and other stuff you know with your soul or your heart. Let's start with this. At its deepest level, Gnosticism was never just a list of dogmas or rules. On the contrary, what made Gnostic thought distinct from other early spiritual currents was the radical idea that real salvation, for a person, comes from some inner knowing, gnosis, not from any external ritual or blind faith in a religious system. Gnosis is that moment when you yourself see a deeper dimension of reality, which is kind of like what Carl Gustav Jung called glimpsing archetypes, or connecting with the collective unconscious. A lot of Gnostics talk about a divine spark trapped within our human interior. The body and the physical world become, in that narrative, some sort of veil, or in more extreme versions, the product of a demiurge who's incomplete, maybe even hostile. Me? I totally align with Gnostics here, because I've always felt our senses and our sense of time are limiting us. Where does Jung come into this? Jung, when he analyzed myths and religions, noticed there are symbols and contents in the human psyche that go beyond individual experience. Archetypes, universal patterns, can emerge in dreams, visions, creative processes. From a Gnostic angle, you could say those deep layers of the psyche, that hidden, true knowledge, are echoes of something bigger than our personal I. Meanwhile, Jung saw religions and mythologies as external projections of those archetypes. So gods, demons, angels, they're in some sense emanations of the collective unconscious. Gnostics might agree, but they'd say that for them, all this was literally cosmic drama. The demiurge and the eons, the emanations of the divine, aren't just psychological metaphors, but an actual blueprint of a deeper or multidimensional being. When I said early on that I believe we're part of a much broader structure than just 3D+Time, that's exactly what I meant. To me, Gnosticism kind of merges my beloved abstract physics with how I really see the world. I wouldn't call myself a Gnostic, but it's the closest to my truth, what I know, what I've discovered, what I've experienced. And just to be totally clear, none of this is proven by science. I'm just telling you what I personally believe. Now, for that it from bit idea from John Wheeler and the whole info theory approach. Modern quantum physics is leaning more and more toward the idea that information might be at the core of our universe's description. John Wheeler coined this phrase, it from bit, suggesting that what's fundamental is information, out of which emerges the material, the it, and all physical dynamics. That's not to say Wheeler was Gnostic, he never claimed that, but there's a cool parallel. If, at the deepest level, everything comes down to webs of informational connections, quantum states, wave functions, observations, then maybe our material universe is, in some sense, the manifestation of something deeper and intangible. In a Gnostic view, you could say the world's structure holds some divine thought, or divine logos, and what we perceive is just a measly copy in the form of sensory matter. Sound a bit similar? Sure does, though your average quantum physicist would say, come on, that's just a metaphor. Maybe so, but I'm guessing at least some of you out there would say, I know what I lived through, I know what I saw, and once you know it, you just know. Call me nuts, but I know this. As a physicist, the most I can say is that I can't disprove it. As me, Ollie, I know it, Plain and simple. I spent years trying to rationalize it, and then I stumbled on Gnosticism. I'm absolutely sure I've had some very deep Gnostic experiences in my life, and nothing else explains them. Believe me, I looked for answers for over 20 years. In the Gospel of Thomas, there's this bit. When you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower. That's basically describing another mathematically different space, definitely not ours. If you try to see it with your eyes, ears, and a sense of time, you definitely won't see it. Still, from a philosophical speculation standpoint, Gnostic belief that our world is a veil, and the true reality, the pleroma, is a dynamic reservoir of divinity, could line up with the idea that physics still hasn't revealed all dimensions or layers of existence. Information becomes the key to why the world looks like it does. And who's the demiurge in that context? Possibly, and we're deep in speculation territory here, some archetypal guard or subsystem that imposes constraints on information, producing the illusion of matter. My take is that we have a messed up concept of the world because we're always stuck in 3D+Time. Think about it. Imagine you don't actually have your thick or skinny butt at all, that it's not you, but some packaging we got stuffed into here. And worse, someone punished us so we have blinkers on, like a horse, seeing way less than actually exists, just these 3 dimensions. Plus, God said, you know what? Let's play a joke on them and let them think something like time exists, and the distance from point A to point B will be defined by so-and-so formula. This is the space we're living in now, the one we see, but it doesn't have to be the only one. There may be others where, to quote, when you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower. Let me cut their entire reality down to a sad 3 dimensions and toss in one that doesn't even exist. Time. Haha. God might have thought. In that sense, Genesis must have been a blast. We're like ants someone put in a little container on their desk. We think the container is the whole universe. Let's see if there are other ants out there. Let's walk to the other side of the aquarium. One day we'll get there. The ants think, but they never consider looking beyond the container. That's basically how I see us searching for other intelligent beings, or however you'd name it. We measure distance in Cartesian space out to other galaxies, instead of stepping out of the 3D+Time container. Sure, that's my pure speculation. Not a scientific theory by any means, but I like it. And sure, you might say, what does God or any other form of existence care about a bunch of ants? Maybe nothing, but there are people who do care about ants, who keep them. Maybe there aren't many, but they exist. Whether or not anyone cares about us is a subject for a whole different talk. Okay, next. Panpsychism, or how consciousness in everything, kinda sounds like the Gnostic spark. Panpsychism is the idea that consciousness, in some form, pervades nature. You can take it moderately, like some proto-consciousness in quantum fields. Or you can go radical. Everything is aware to some degree. For a lot of mainstream scientists, that's borderline bizarre, but folks like Galen Strawson, or certain interpreters of Penrose's gravitational collapse theory, keep a door open. Since we don't have a complete theory of mind, we can't rule out that maybe the foundation of everything is some kind of universal, scattered awareness. Gnostics would say, yes, each soul has a piece of the divine fullness, the pleroma, but for various reasons people can't reach that deep level. Panpsychism's version? It's like every particle or quantum field contains an elementary sense of subjectivity, and we, these complex beings, just integrate that on higher levels. We don't have direct proof of it, but Jung and others noted that the human mind keeps discovering areas that don't seem reducible to plain old biochemistry. That's where interpretation creeps in. Maybe that's the real essence of the universe. Maybe that Gnostic spark is our inner ability to go beyond the physical layer. Philip K. Dick, Valis, and the Cosmic Intelligence. Valis is basically the book of my life. I did a short hyper-focus episode about it. Dick went further than most sci-fi authors, cooking up scenarios with a concept of a cosmic informational system, Valis, vast active living intelligence system, that communicates with humans and reveals the true structure of the world. That's more like a mystical revelation than standard SF. And there's a heavy Gnostic angle here. Our world is an illusion, a control system, while the divine info rays seep in. Scholars of Dick's work see it as a literary form of Gnosticism, mixed with an interest in cutting-edge science and cybernetics. Dick was familiar with AI theories and systems theory. Empirically, it's impossible to verify whether Valis exists or if it's a legit message from true reality. Most physicists will say it's fiction, but Gnostic-minded folks see it as more evidence that the human mind keeps intuitively sensing there's something deeper than what we see, and sometimes that depth calls out for us to wake up.
So, the big question: do we have any empirical basis for the Gnostic perspective? Most scientists would say no, even if quantum physics opens some space for speculation, like non-locality, entanglement, weird wave function collapse interpretations, many worlds theories, or holographic models. None of that actually requires a divine spark or an intelligent demiurge. It can all be explained without bringing spirituality into it. But the more open people might argue that science, as we know it, is methodologically limited to studying repeatable, testable phenomena. The realm of religious or spiritual experiences, like mystical epiphanies, internal visions, revelations, doesn't map neatly onto strict falsification criteria. Jung would say we lack the tools to objectively measure the dynamics of archetypes in the collective unconscious. Maybe it's the same with Gnostic insight. If it happens within us, then it's an inner experience, not something you can just replicate in a lab. So, Gnosticism in light of the latest quantum and field theories. There are some fringe currents, like the Penrose-Hameroff quantum mind research, or the more philosophical takes on ADS-CFT, that can be philosophically coupled with Gnostic motifs. The role of consciousness in wave function collapse. Some people suggest consciousness is key to how quantum mechanics operates, think von Neumann-Wigner, or the more out-there Penrose stuff. We might say our act of knowing is more than just an epiphenomenon. In a quasi-Gnostic interpretation, that consciousness is the divine element shaping reality, like our world is part of this dynamic spiritual foundation, the pleroma, and matter is just condensed information, holography and layers of reality. If our 3D world is some projection of physics happening on a higher dimensional boundary, that lines up with the Gnostic claim that we're seeing a mere projection, while the real fullness, the pleroma, is beyond our senses. Sure, actual physicists don't say that's a divine sphere, but the metaphor is strong. We're in the shadow, 3D, while above that is a structure we have no direct access to, summing up in a Lem-like mental workout. What would Stanisław Lem say to all this? His writing showed big skepticism toward easy metaphysical answers, but also a huge openness to the possibility that the human mind can bump into something utterly incomprehensible and bigger than we can handle. See Solaris, his master's voice. He might view Gnosticism as a fascinating example of how, for centuries, humans sensed a deeper layer, but also he'd caution that religious or spiritual interpretations might just be our attempt to find meaning in the face of cosmic strangeness. So in that Lem spirit, I see a message like this. Sure, Gnosticism can be an intellectual attempt to explain the deeper structure of the universe, but that doesn't mean we've nailed the truth. It mostly shows that humans feel the imperfection and limits of their world, both biologically and psychologically, and try to address it with some mythic framework. Still, it's worth examining these myths under the lens of science, because they might hold a core of truth about the nature of mind, information, and maybe the universe itself. Final conclusions. Gnosticism is more than a story about an evil demiurge. It's a deep conviction there's another level of reality, and our regular life doesn't show the fullness of being.
Jung saw Gnostic motifs as a great metaphor for archetypes and the collective unconscious. Demiurge, eons, pleroma. It can all be treated as psychological figures, describing the light-dark duality in the human psyche. The latest quantum physics and field theories don't exactly validate Gnosticism, but they do give us revolutionary pictures, information as a foundation, holographic space, maybe the observer's role in collapsing the wave function. For a lot of thinkers, that's enough to say, look, in science too, the world might be totally different than we imagine, and maybe there are deeper layers we don't see. Strictly empirical attempts to confirm a Gnostic spark run into big methodological barriers. Mystical experiences or inner gnosis aren't easily measured. Doesn't mean they have zero cognitive value. Maybe it's just a different mode of knowing, like an internal experiment. From a Lemish or generally rational but open standpoint, you could see Gnosticism as an ancient speculative spiritual proto-system where you can actually hear faint echoes of what we debate today about the informational nature of the universe. Proof? We've got none. But it does wake up the mind and get us to wonder, and that alone can spark progress. So, is Gnosticism just some relic or curiosity? Definitely not. In the New Age scene, or all kinds of modern, spiritual but not religious movements, you can see Gnostic ideas popping up again. The world is an illusion. We need that awakening knowledge. We've got divinity inside that we gotta discover. Meanwhile, there's a growing academic interest in Gnosticism as an intellectual phenomenon, where religion, philosophy, and depth psychology collide. And some physicists and cosmologists, at least a few, are fascinated by the question of whether our 3D+Time reality is fully real, or maybe just a hologram, simulation, or projection of something way bigger. So in that sense, Gnosticism is alive and well, because it tackles the fundamental question: is what we call the world really everything? Or is there a deeper, hidden layer? And how do we reach it? The spiritual version says it's through gnosis, an inner awakening. The scientific version says it's through theory, experiment, hypotheses about the structure of the universe. Maybe both paths reflect the same longing for something just beyond our reach. Alright, so over the course of this journey, through the ideas of telepathy, ghosts, higher dimensions, meditation, and Gnosticism, we've dipped into topics that basically hang at the edge of science, philosophy, and metaphysics. And it's striking that no matter which field we're talking about, the same big questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and our place in the cosmos keep showing up. You'll find them in research labs and mystical traditions alike, though they might be framed differently. Now sure, science hasn't confirmed telepathy, and all the investigations so far haven't yielded any ironclad proof. But speculation about quantum entanglement, possible microtubule coherence in neurons, or the hypothetical role of consciousness in quantum physics all go to show that there's still a lot we haven't pinned down. So telepathy sits there in that formally unrefuted zone, inspiring each new generation of researchers and thinkers. Then, when it comes to ghosts or consciousness after death, we can move from psychology, which explains hauntings through hallucinations or pareidolia, all the way to holographic cosmology and theories about the informational essence of the universe. We don't have the evidence to rewrite mainstream science, but our deep drive to explore what might lie beyond the known is pretty fundamental to who we are. There's also the matter of higher dimensions and our limited perception. String theories, M-theory, and holographic models hint that reality might be a whole lot more complex than our senses or gut instincts tell us. If our world is just a shadow of a higher dimensional structure, then maybe there really is some place where physics and metaphysics meet, and it's patiently waiting for us to discover it. Speaking of direct experience, meditation, especially that having no head practice, gives us these subjective glimpses that seem to go beyond typical perception. Whether we treat them as purely neurobiological processes or mystical insights, they reveal our mind's ability to transform itself and taste something akin to Gnostic enlightenment,
And as for Gnosticism, with its core concepts of the demiurge, the pleroma, and that divine spark in each person, it definitely echoes the latest quantum speculation and big questions about information as the bedrock of reality. Sure, science doesn't treat Gnosticism as empirical knowledge, but the parallels between a holographic universe, panpsychist ideas, or it from bit, and Gnostic stories of hidden reality can't help but stand out. So what's next? Can we ever push beyond our 3D+Time to peek behind the veil? Will science someday give us the tools to figure out if our hunches about a multidimensional reality, spirituality, or consciousness are more than just intellectual games? Or, like Lem suggested, maybe the most important thing is that we keep asking questions, that we stay curious about who we are in this endless cosmos. So folks, I'll leave you with that thought. Stay cruised, stay hyper-focused, and keep searching for what lies beyond.